Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
This is True Crimecast. Jamie and John here. What's up, big guy?
Not much, man. It's, dude, Kentucky weather's been awesome lately. And by that, I mean really rainy. But it's finally cleared up a little bit. I'm so excited to mow my yard and
man.
Your yard, my neighbor's yard.
Legitimately, in case people don't believe us, I think John would be a full-time lawnmower if he could. He does it for fun.
I have legitimately considered opening a side business, in particularly with my daughter. My daughter loves mowing with me and doing work with me. So I think we're going to do like daddy-daughter home services or something like that.
You can come up with some good names. I like that.
Yeah.
We'll workshop it. Before we get started with today's episode, which is, it's a tough one. I want to give a big thank you to a new 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts. This comes from Vinny A81 from Suds Media. Says, I'm a Patreon sub, but I still wanted to leave a 5-star review. I did reach out to you on X with a correction on the Owen Hart story, but haven't heard the correction mentioned on the show. I first heard you guys on Talk is Jericho and absolutely had to start listening to the podcast. Keep up the great work. I just went over to X and I apologize for missing this earlier. During the Owen Hart episode, it came up that there was potentially blood from Owen in the ring. As it turns out, that was fake blood from a spot that the Brood and the Hardy Boys did earlier that night.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and I'll fall on the sword on that one. I think I originally replied that we would fix that and totally forgot.
Yeah, I don't remember ever seeing it, but that's where we're at. We're all good.
So Vinny, that's on me. This is John, and I'm sorry. This job and my 15 other things got me distracted, and I forgot.
Maybe you just shouldn't mow so much grass. But
I love mowing
Thank
grass.
you for the review. Also a great way to get us episode recommendations. Somebody recommended this one, and I'm going to be honest, I'm mad at him.
This one felt like I am back at work. It's brutal. Before we do that, I do want to say, if you like brutal cases, the Patreon episode for the month of May was just brutal and awful, but also one of the most heroic stories we've covered. So go check that one out. For as little as $3 a month, you can have access to a bonus episode each and every month and early ad-free content as well. Jamie, you're going to need to put your phone down for this one, my man, because we have another awful crime involving a child. I'm going to let you get the ball rolling.
Yeah, I do want to... Obviously, I complain about these when we do them, but they are important stories and stories that need to be told of these kids that fall to monsters. And thankfully, I think this one ends up in a place that maybe it should. So let's start out talking about Robert Manwill. He's a little boy that's going to be the focus of today's episode. He was described by many as an affectionate boy who loved to give big hugs. He was, there are some kids who just have that sweet aura about them, and he was one of those. In 2009, when he was 8 years old, he was living primarily with his father, Charles, in New Plymouth, Idaho. Robert's mother, Melissa Jenkins, had visitation rights, but wasn't staying with them at the home. But in June and July of that year, he did spend some time staying with his mom. He was staying with her and her live-in boyfriend, Daniel Ehrlich. On Saturday morning of July 24th, 2009, Brett Quilter with the Boise Police Department was called to the Oak Village apartment complex. Ehrlich had placed a call because his girlfriend's son, Robert, had gone missing. The officer said, and this is a quote, "When we got there were some real issues with the stories being told. As investigations go, timelines either get stronger or they get weaker, and this one was getting weak pretty fast. So I was afraid that something really bad had happened. It wasn't looking like what we were being told was true," end quote. So something was fishy from the get-go when they got to the apartment.
I know exactly what this guy's talking about. I mean, have you ever been around someone who's telling a story and then 20 minutes later you realized, things aren't adding up. Like, things are changing. Your story is changing as you tell it.
It's really hard to maintain a lie. Like, the truth doesn't change, but trying to remember your lies is a tough thing to do.
And I feel like officers that I've been around and investigators that I've been around, they're really good at asking a lot of questions in a way that you don't really realize what they're trying to do is to get you to repeat what you just said. But, you know, it's really interesting that when they do that, they're seeing if you're telling the same thing over and over. Like, what's changing?
Parents should get that type of training. We should be allowed to do that.
So by mid-morning on the second day, this detective, Quilter, he had a gut feeling that Ehrlich was involved in some way. Investigators searched in and around the complex for Robert, but unfortunately over several days, there were still no signs of this kid. So thousands of people would show up from the community to help search for this kid. Quilter said the community came out in masses to help, and investigators searched apartments around the area. They searched cars around the area. Of course, they brought in dogs to kind of scour the grounds of the apartment complex. They searched a nearby pond. They even drained the pond to make sure that he wasn't in there. Idaho National Guard helicopters flew in, and they did aerial surveillance trying to see if this kid had just wandered off and got lost. That actually happened in our community, right? Where a kid kind of in the mountains around us got lost, and they just found him wandering around. He was walking in a big circle. It was just so
a big
terrible.
Stormy night. Yeah, it was super scary.
They even they found a guy who was connected to Ehrlich and Jenkins, and just with that gut feeling they had, they got a warrant and dug up this guy's backyard.
Yeah,
and they didn't find any signs of Robert, but police knew something sinister was going on. I feel like in their guts, they knew that.
And there's so many times when we cover a case and we say, you know, this investigation went bad at this point or at that point. I just want to say, great job here, guys. Really on top of things. Even if you're not finding what you want, they are doing the right things. Anybody involved in the investigation that ended up spending a decent amount of time with Ehrlich and his mom Jenkins said that they never really felt welcome. It's not like they were eager to have authorities around to help them find the child. Ehrlich kept asking why more detectives were needed and why they wanted more and more information and why they kept talking to him. We always say that, you know, you'll never know how you'll react until you're in these situations, but I'm pretty sure my vibe would not be leave me alone. I feel pretty strong about that. 2 members of the police department also shared that in the hours after he reported Robert missing, Ehrlich started getting agitated, nervous, and he was quick to be angry at them specifically when they were there trying to help find this child. He seemed to be concerned that everybody was focusing on him, seemed to be paranoid, and it really looked suspicious. Early in the investigation, Ehrlich called the police saying he found some evidence that Robert may have run away. Robert had loved a certain brand of frozen breakfast sausages, and Ehrlich claimed to find an empty box of them in the bushes outside of the apartment. So the inference here is that Robert grabbed this box, maybe threw him in a backpack and threw the box out of the way as he was leaving, but that's not a lot of evidence in my opinion. He said he found the box approximately 8 hours after he saw Robert on a very hot night, and the box was still cold to the touch. Also, detectives didn't claim to have ever seen the box when they were there searching the area, and again, they did a very thorough job of checking out the neighborhood. One detective noted that there are some other odd things that Ehrlich did. For example, he and Jenkins were already referring to Robert in the past tense.
That is a huge red flag.
And I assume that's something you're trained in, John, of how do you talk about the child? Is it Robert loves this, he loves that, he would have taken this with him, he will be doing this when we find him, I bet he is, or Robert was this, was that, liked, loved,
we loved him. Yeah, that kind of thing. That's just really indicative of what's to come.
His mom, for example, made a comment that she remembers that Robert would just sit and watch cartoons all day. Didn't matter what the cartoon was. And then Ehrlich replied, yeah, I remember when he would just lay down on that couch and watch cartoons as if it was a distant past memory. Investigators noted that the way he said that just kind of made the hairs on the back of their neck stand up. It's definitely, Ehrlich is continuing to draw attention to himself.
It's a hard spot to be in for Quilter and the other cops involved in this case, man. Like, if your gut is telling you that these folks did something awful to their kid, I mean, your primary objective is to find this kid. But to have to work with these people and obviously just getting roadblock after roadblock, it has to be super frustrating.
And you're balancing the act of, we have to find out more information from this guy, but if we press too hard, he's going to stop talking. So how can we keep getting information and keep moving the investigation forward at the same time?
10 days after the search began for Robert Manwill, this would be on August the 3rd, 2009, Robert Manwill's body was found in an irrigation canal in the small town of Kuna, which is several miles southwest of Boise. Dude, when they found this kid, he was floating in the water, but there were some rocks in his pockets. So obviously this was in an attempt to try to make his body go down to the bottom of this body of water so that
somebody
nobody
didn't
would find
want it
him.
to float. Yeah.
So there was that. There was also evidence in the apartment that something had happened. There was a covered hole, like a recently covered hole in the wall, which kind of was a sign that maybe this Robert had gone through some kind of trauma where some part of his body was hit or pushed in a way that put a hole in the wall. So let's talk about the adults that are in this situation. Of course, we have 36-year-old Daniel Ehrlich, and he had served some time in an Idaho prison. He was being held there for burglary and grand theft auto. That was in 1990s. He was also arrested again for several probation violations. He had been convicted of battery and possession of drug paraphernalia. So just not the dude I would want hanging out with my kid. Robert's mother, Melissa Jenkins, she was on probation herself. She was on probation at the time for fracturing the skull of her younger son. This was an infant, and it was believed to have been the child of Ehrlich, and that was earlier that year when this had happened. So she was not supposed to be living with the baby, but she was, and she was living with this child with Robert. So a lot of times if social services are called in, maybe this child was placed after this injury with a relative of some kind, and they have most states would have what's called a safety plan. Like, all right, this child can live with your relative, but you are not supposed to be around this child unsupervised. So what happened there? Who dropped the ball that she was around this kid?
Absolutely. And, I was thinking about Ehrlich and burglary and grand theft. I think we often just think to ourselves that theft and burglary are the same thing. And while they do both involve taking things, burglary is much more invasive. You're going into somebody's space. Grand theft, usually you're stealing a car from somebody. So it's a little more aggressive and indicative of potential violence, in my opinion. As investigators dug deeper, they found that this was just not a place for a kid to be living. This was, in a lot of ways, a house of horrors for a child. Ehrlich, now we know, allegedly tortured the boy, beating him on his head and on his body with Ehrlich's fists, hands, and knees. Court documents said that Ehrlich beat Robert with the intent to cause suffering, to execute vengeance, or to satisfy some sadistic inclination by inflicting on Robert G. Manwill extreme or prolonged acts of brutality with the intent to cause suffering. That is very direct, and I love the language used there to really try to capture how evil this guy was, and what he was trying to do here wasn't a form of discipline that went too far. It's not in any way just a reaction of some kind. He is intentional about this, and his mom knew about all this, but she never, reported the abuse or sought medical attention when Robert needed it. Instead, Jenkins allegedly aided in the abuse and hid her son from anybody that may notice that there were issues or that would want to help Robert.
So in court documents, prosecutors said that Manwill was beaten for weeks while he was staying with his mom and his stepdad. So Daniel Ehrlich, not a small guy, 277-pound guy. They said that he was kneeling on the chest of Robert, who was only 50 pounds, and this happened on more than one occasion. It's also believed that on or about July 24th, 2009, Daniel Ehrlich got particularly violent with Robert and shoved his head into the wall, and that's where we saw the patched hole that we were talking about earlier. So the case against Daniel was that he panicked the day that he killed Robert because the kid was covered in bruises and about to go home to his father. So if he went home to the dad and this kid was covered in bruises and the dad asks what happened, Ehrlich is going to be found out. So Ehrlich was afraid that Robert would talk about the abuse and that the other child that he had with Melissa would be taken away.
Yeah, so essentially he's thinking his only way out of this was to eliminate the child, which is obviously horrific. And when we get back from the break, we'll talk about some more heartbreaking details about this case and maybe how this could have been prevented. This is where I'm going to yield to you, John, on some of your expertise. We mentioned that social services was involved with this family, and they were coming out to visit the house a few times a week to check on the situation for the baby because he was supposed to be living with his dad, Ehrlich, and to teach them how to be better parents. I've been involved in some of that on the other side as a foster parent of the expectations on birth families in order to get their kids back, but there was a presence in the home. When they came around, Ehrlich and Jenkins would have Robert hide in the closet. It would come out at trial that prosecutor Jill Longhurst said he beat him and he tortured him, and Robert endured it, unable to talk to anyone, unable to tell anyone what was going on. Jenkins and Ehrlich were both charged with first-degree murder. Ehrlich pleaded not guilty and went to trial. Just want to go back before we get into the trial, John. Social workers were around, but when you're a social worker, you're there for a purpose. You're there to, in this situation, to help the parents learn to be better parents. And yes, there is an element of a welfare check there, but every time you enter a home, it's not an all-out investigation where you're looking under furniture and stuff trying to find people, right?
Well, this is interesting.
Or should it be?
Well, it's interesting because this case started in 2009, and I started my career in 2009, or actually a little earlier than that. But anyway, in 2009, a story very similar to this actually, and I don't think it's this particular story, but there was a policy change around this time. So maybe it was this case, but anyway, there were social workers going into homes to visit kids and to talk to the parents to see how things were going, to assess the situation. And the parents would tell the social workers, oh, you came during nap time. Little Johnny is taking a nap, so please don't bother him. He's not been feeling good. I don't want him to wake up.
Right.
Well, this happened multiple times. And finally they realized that mom was hiding the kid and didn't want the social workers to see him. And ultimately that child was also murdered as well. So I will tell you that early on in my career, like if someone said, oh, hey, that he's sleeping, he's not feeling good, like I would be like, oh, okay, cool. But now, regardless of the situation, like if I'm there to see a kid, I'm not leaving until I see the kid.
You have to lay your eyes on them. Even
if they're asleep, I'm going to be like, well, hey, I'm going to need you to open up the kid's bedroom door and just let me make sure his chest is moving up and down.
Okay.
No, actually, I'd probably wake him up and say, hey, I'm here for the visit. We got to talk now.
Yeah,
Sorry
how you
to wake
doing?
You up. But yeah, it's easy to point fingers. You know, of course, I would hope that the social worker regrets not laying eyes on the kids, and who knows what the situation was, but easy to point fingers. But yeah, it ultimately, if they would have saw the kid was bruised up, hopefully this tragedy would not have happened.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm sure I learned that in training at some point, but we were kind of on the other side of the situation and always, I don't know, my kids never napped, so I couldn't even lie about it. All right, let's go back to the trial where Ehrlich is facing charges of first-degree murder. The prosecution started out by laying out his motive for killing Robert. The prosecutor alleged that Ehrlich was stuck in the apartment with the boy who he had come to despise. It wasn't just about getting physical aggression out. He hated Robert. He said Robert was the one person who would take away his baby son by telling on him for the abuse he suffered and telling on his mom for her role in it as well. One word to the right person, one welfare check is all it would take to take that baby away. So in Ehrlich's mind, the prosecution says he was doing this all with the intention of just maintaining custody of his baby.
After 28 days of testimony, more than 100 witnesses testified. You heard evidence and arguments. A jury took less than 2 hours to find Daniel Ehrlich guilty of first-degree murder by torture and failure to report a death to authorities, and he was sentenced to life in prison. And I would say, good job, jury. So during sentencing, Judge Williamson had a lot to say to Daniel. She said, quote, "The kind of sentence that might be most appropriate, I cannot impose. I can't impose a sentence that he endure the torture from someone who weighs 5 times what he weighs, to have someone drop to their knees and land on his abdomen. I can't impose the chair. I can't impose the wall. I can't impose the occasional aggravated battery on Mr. Ehrlich. Those things would be considered cruel punishment. But Mr. Ehrlich, in the privacy of his home, committed cruel punishment on Robert. But I can't do that to Mr. Ehrlich. Mr. Ehrlich is entitled to the protection of our Constitution. He has to be treated fairly. The crime did not need to happen," and said she wonders why it did. Now, Mr. Ehrlich, by his conduct, has shown that he did not like Robert. One phone call and Robert's family would have been there to take him to safety and take him back to the people who loved and cared for him. As it was, Robert died all alone in substantial pain with no one there to care on him and to love him, end quote. So then the judge took a deep breath and said, quote, "He was just dropped into a canal with rocks in his pocket, where he would sink to the bottom of a canal so no one could find him. He was just a thing to them," end quote. I thank God for judges like this who have just extreme empathy for these victims who are defenseless. So thank God for her. And I would have probably been thrown off the bench because I would have probably said, I hope that what happened to this boy happens to you in jail.
Sure.
So yeah,
I think that's probably how a lot of people felt. And yeah, I love when a judge, because they are in the place, in the authority to say something like this, to have that kind of voice and have it heard. And I think that's therapeutic for the family, but also let's get the truth out here. Make no mistake that this wasn't just a situation where the evidence lined up. Like, he did this and it was awful. So kudos to her for that. And his mom was also charged with first-degree murder, and she pled guilty. So she essentially pled out to aiding and abetting second-degree murder in exchange for a sentence of 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. She did have the opportunity to address the court at her sentencing, and she said, "It's all true. Robert Manwill should not be dead. I know that all I had to do was ask for help. It's my fault that Robert's not with us. Robert would be with us now if I'd call you," directed at Robert's father. "And I know that. I'm guilty. You're the best dad Robert could have ever had. I should have asked you for help. I want to go back, but I can't. You were a great dad. Please don't blame yourself. You need to blame me," end quote. Then Judge Williamson followed up saying, "Everybody knows, no question about it, you could have prevented the death of your son. I'm just not buying it that you have all this remorse. I just don't think that's sincere. You just didn't care." Williamson said that she would have liked to impose a sentence greater than 25 years, but That was the limit of the law, given the charges that the prosecution allowed her to plead down to.
And I would hope that it's 25 years and not, 5 years and then out for good behavior. I hope that there's no chance of parole. I hope that she stays in there for the full amount of time. After sentencing, Robert's father, Charles, took some time to thank law enforcement and the community for their help. He would go on to say, quote, "It's been a long 2 years, but today the system worked and we got some justice for my son." He said that he wanted to extend his thanks to the Boise Police Department, Ada County Prosecutor's Office, and the city of Boise and surrounding areas for all the support we got from the help of the public. And he went on to just say thank you. There was a spokesperson for the Jenkins family who said, quote, "These 2 years have been the hardest thing a family could ever go through. We lost a child, and then our family, we lost Melissa. We lost Aiden, which was the baby. We lost a whole piece of our family because of two people's stupid actions. We have closure, Robert has justice, and God will take care of the rest of it," end quote.
So what is the process for deciding custody there, John? I know that the ideal situation is for children to be with a family member. In a case like this, the grandparents would have been at least considered at some point, right?
Yeah, it's awful. The missing person, probably the death, when they realized what had happened to Robert, started an investigation times two. It started an investigation to figure out what happened to him, but it probably also triggered an investigation into his parents. So I would imagine that social services came in and tried to find an appropriate relative, but according to this statement in the Jenkins family, it looks like social workers probably chose to place that child outside of the family's care, just in an abundance of safety.
Sure. And this certainly shined a lot of attention on social services in the state of Idaho. And it said that they really had to backtrack and analyze a lot of their policies, a lot of their practices. They reviewed the case and made a lot of changes based on that. They also had a second independent body review the work and give them an expert recommendation for how they should change and improve their practices. They brought in an expert from the National Resource Center for Child Protective Services to review their safety assessment practices and the way that they conducted investigations. They also used to employ an incident-based approach where social workers would focus on determining whether something happened or not. Now there's a more broad, comprehensive approach to all the questions that are involved in situations where children may be at risk of being abused or neglected.
Yeah, and I know other states have gotten on board with that too, because what ends up happening in situations like this, or what used to happen, was, it's terrible. There, especially when social services are already actively involved. So it goes into a blame game pretty quickly. Why didn't you see the kid? Why didn't you notice these red flags? Why didn't, so it really puts a lot on one person's shoulders when the blame should be squarely on the person responsible. But now, we have, it's awful that you have to have this, but we have fatality boards that research these cases and are a support to the workers to talk about, think about the worker who missed something. I mean, that's going to weigh on them forever. So you got to be supportive, even though obviously things needed to change with their policies. We have near fatality boards. So it's, shout out to the people who go to work every day to these hellish situations. They also changed the way that they conducted safety assessments of children who don't reside primarily in the home, called temporary child residence, which is what Robert was while he was staying with his mother. Also, at the time, Idaho was the only state in the U.S. that didn't have a child death review panel, which is what I was talking about earlier. So they did establish one after Robert's murder. The Idaho Child Fatality Review Team started meeting in 2012. It included physicians, epidemiologists, pathologists, and child advocates and coroners. They were tasked with reviewing all child deaths, not just homicides. And what the department thought would be tweaks and refinements turned out to take years and completely transformed the way that they conduct their assessments.
Yeah, and obviously this is a needed transformation, but not the way you want to get to it. You don't want to wait till a tragedy happens. And, there are a lot of times when you don't want to go with the flow and just do what all the other states are doing. But if you're the last state holding out on making changes that can help people stay safe, you may want to go ahead and move forward with that. When it came to the community, Robert's classmates at their high school graduation took a moment to remember him. They spoke about him and how he did not get to grow up. They didn't get to see who he would have turned out to be or who he would become. They also put up a large green swing at the elementary school in New Plymouth, Idaho, in memory of Robert. The community has raised tens of thousands of dollars for scholarships in his honor. You can still find photos, notes, and mementos of Robert on the walls of his old classroom. And the glass trophy case also has a photo of Robert that you can still see today. So in all this, John, the community really did their part. Law enforcement did their part. And like you said, you can throw blame around. Policymakers didn't do their part. Social workers made some mistakes, but let's all put the focus on the guy who did this. It was Daniel Ehrlich and Melissa Jenkins. They were the ones involved in this. They deserve all of the blame.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is tragic. Unfortunately, it's something that I see all the time, and I wish that I could have went back in time, at some point to talk to myself in college to be like, hey, bro, you're in college. Literally, you could be a CPA and never have to hear about all this crap. But I'm passionate about making sure that our most vulnerable are safe and that these kids have someone to love them and to care for them. So it's I don't know. It's a hard job. You hear some stuff that you'd rather not, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't be wanting to do anything else.
And just like a lot of
why I mow a lot of grass.
I do know. I wouldn't do that because you spend a lot of time in your head thinking about things. But I think this is another one of those thankless jobs. If you're doing your job, nobody even knows you're there. Nobody notices you. So it's very thankless. And I probably don't thank you enough for the work that you do. And I know I've been out of foster care and for a little while, so I don't interact with a lot of those folks, but super thankful for the folks we interacted with and got to work with and adopting our two young ones. And yeah, thanks for doing it every day, man.
I feel like I don't do anything compared to the investigators, the ongoing workers who are there, kind of like boots on the ground, man. They're in the thick of it. So there is no amount of money that you could pay them to ever really compensate them for what they're worth. I've got a cushy job. I love what I do, but it's not anything close to this. So those are the real heroes, not me for sure.
Thankful for change and the fact that things did get safer in Idaho and across the country because of this. But of course, a brutal story of a child who was taken away for zero good reasons. I, like you, hope that the prison sentences hold up, that Melissa is in prison for at least that 25 years. And I didn't buy her remorse either, though. So also thankful for the judges that spoke out. I think they did a good job of summarizing what really happened.
Used to listen to a podcast by a detective, Woody Overton, and he would always say that prison justice will be enacted on him for sure. And I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, we appreciate you listening. I know this was a hard one, but like I said, it's important to tell the stories of individuals like Robert Manwill and how his life was taken away and how his community and family responded to help others and to improve the lives and safety of those around them. And hopefully people enjoyed this episode, and we will, of course, continue to provide. We're doing 3 a week now, and we got some bonus interviews lined up. So I know people like some of those, don't like some of those, but that's why they're on top of everything else, not taking the place of our regular programming.
Yep. Scroll past it if you don't like it. But guys, we really appreciate you sticking around each and every week for True Crimecast. We couldn't do it without you.
Thank you, guys.
And until next crime, this has been True Crimecast.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.